Friends, thank you for being here today. We stand at a moment in our nation's history that requires us to look past the daily noise of cable news and social media feeds. We need to look at the machinery of our government, the gears and levers that have held this republic together for nearly 2.5 centuries. Last week, an event occurred in Washington that, while it may not have dominated every headline, signaled a seismic shift in the foundation of our current political era. A sitting president of the United States picked up the telephone, called a United States senator from his own party, and unloaded on her with profanity and aggression. This was not a conversation with a member of the opposition. It was not a skirmish with a journalist. It was a direct confrontation with a member of his own ideological coalition. Why? Because she, along with a growing number of her colleagues, voted to limit his power. Right now, something is happening in the corridors of the Capitol that hasn't happened in years. Republicans, President Trump's own Republicans, are organizing against him. They are doing so quietly, deliberately, and on the most dangerous issue possible, the president's authority to take America to war. This is not the political theater we have become accustomed to. This is not another leak designed to grab a momentary headline. This is a group of lawmakers who have decided that loyalty has limits, and those limits have just been tested. What we are going to explore today is complex. It involves emergency powers, threats against allied nations, constitutional standoffs, and a president who appears to view every restraint as a personal attack. But by the end of this analysis, we will understand exactly what is at stake and why this moment could define how power works in America for decades to come. To truly understand the gravity of this situation, let us begin by looking at the fracture in the foundation and setting the scene. It is late at night in Washington. Phones are buzzing across Capitol Hill. Staffers are whispering in hallways. Senators are refreshing their screens, double-checking what they are seeing, because what they are seeing defies the established patterns of the last few years. The president isn't attacking Democrats. He isn't going after the media. He's furious at his own party. And for the first time in a very long time, his own party is pushing back. Those of us who have observed politics for decades know the difference between theater and substance. We have seen the furrowed brow era of resistance. We have seen senators issue concerned statements, express deep trouble with a tweet, and then, inevitably, fall in line when the voting starts. That was performance. It was designed to placate moderate voters while maintaining access to the White House. This is different. What we are watching now is Republicans actively working to block presidential authority. Not symbolically, but legislatively. They joined with Democrats to advance a war powers resolution, a formal move to restrict the president's ability to take military action without congressional approval. We must pause to consider the gravity of that action. Members of the president's own party looked at his behavior, looked at the volatility of the geopolitical landscape, and concluded, we need to put legal guardrails around this man before something irreversible happens. That is not a disagreement over tax rates or healthcare policy. That is an intervention. And the president's response? He didn't reach out. He didn't negotiate. He didn't try to bring people back into the fold through the art of persuasion. Reports indicate he called Senator Susan Collins, a Republican who supported the resolution, and berated her with crude language and threats. Not persuasion, intimidation. That reaction tells us everything we need to know about the current executive mindset. When a leader responds to constitutional limits with fury rather than dialogue, it reveals how they actually view power. Not as something granted by law, not as something shared with Congress, but as something personal, something that belongs to them alone. And that belief that power is personal property is exactly what is driving this revolt. Now, to understand the depth of this divide, we have to look at what I call the real estate approach to geopolitics. So what actually triggered this specific revolt? We need to be specific because the details matter. President Trump has been publicly floating the idea of using military force or coercive pressure to acquire Greenland. Now, I need you to sit with that for a moment. When you first hear it, it sounds absurd. It sounds like a joke from a bygone era of imperialism. It sounds like something you would read in a tabloid and dismiss, but it is not. The President of the United States has suggested repeatedly in public that options are on the table for acquiring territory that belongs to Denmark. Denmark is not a hostile nation. Denmark is a NATO ally. It is a country we are treaty-bound to defend. Senator Chris Murphy spelled this out plainly, and when he did, it landed like a shockwave among those who understand the delicate architecture of global peace. Because here is what many do not understand about NATO. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty establishes collective defense. An attack on one member is treated as an attack on all members. That is the foundation of the entire alliance. It is the reason the Soviet Union never rolled tanks into West Germany. It is why NATO has kept the peace in Europe for 75 years. Greenland is Danish territory. If the United States were to take military action or use aggressive coercion against Greenland, we wouldn't just be attacking Denmark. We would be attacking the alliance itself. We would be violating the very treaty we wrote. The scenario lawmakers are now forced to take seriously, not as theory, but as possibility, Is an American president putting us in direct conflict with Europe, with our own allies, over a real estate acquisition? This is not normal. This is not strategy. This is the kind of rhetoric that, in any other era, would end a political career overnight. But we do not live in that era anymore. I want to pause here and ask you, in your lifetime, have you ever seen a president treat NATO allies this way? It's a genuine question. I read every comment, and I'm curious if this aligns with your memory of American foreign policy. And that is exactly what has Republicans terrified. Because once a president starts treating military force as a negotiation tool for land acquisition, the machinery of war begins to turn, whether Congress approves or not. That is why the War Powers Act suddenly matters. That is why Republicans crossed the aisle. They weren't making a political statement. They were trying to close a door before it gets kicked wide open. To understand why this is happening, we have to understand how the president sees the world. And I mean really understand it, not the caricature, but the operating logic. He does not think about geopolitics the way most leaders do, or indeed, the way history suggests they should. He doesn't see alliances as mutual commitments. He doesn't see treaties as binding obligations. He doesn't see international law as a framework that constrains everyone equally. He sees everything as a deal. And in a deal, there are winners and losers. There's leverage and weakness. There are properties to acquire and opponents to dominate. That worldview works in real estate. You can pressure a seller. You can bluff a competitor. You can walk away from a negotiation and come back stronger. But international relations are not Manhattan real estate. Countries have militaries. Alliances have tripwires. Rhetoric has consequences that cannot be undone with a phone call or a settlement check. When you tell the world that military force is on the table for acquiring Allied territory, you are not making a deal. You're issuing a threat. And threats, once made, change the calculations of everyone involved, allies, adversaries, and your own military commanders. Republican senators understand this. Many of them have sat in classified briefings. They have seen how quickly situations escalate in the modern world. They know that words from an American president carry weight that cannot be retracted with a tweet. That is why they are scared. Not because they have suddenly become liberals, not because they dislike the president personally, but because they can see where this road leads, and they do not want to be standing there when the destination is reached. While the focus on international territory is alarming, we must also examine the weaponization of emergency powers. The War Powers Act exists for exactly this kind of moment. It was designed in the aftermath of Vietnam, a time many of us remember well, when Congress realized that presidents had been dragging the country into conflicts without proper authorization. The law requires the president to consult Congress before committing troops and limits military action without congressional approval. It is an emergency brake, and Republicans just pulled it. But the war powers fight is not the only front in this conflict. While Republicans were organizing around military authority, the president made another move. He declared a national emergency related to Venezuelan oil assets. On the surface, to the casual observer, this sounds like energy policy. It sounds like securing resources or protecting American interests. But we must look closer. The timeline for actually benefiting from these assets is years, maybe decades. The infrastructure required is massive. The primary beneficiaries are multinational energy corporations, not American consumers. So why declare an emergency? Because emergencies do something very specific in American law. They concentrate power. They allow the president to bypass normal procedures. They shift authority away from Congress and toward the executive branch. Emergencies are meant for genuine crises, imminent threats, natural disasters, sudden attacks that require immediate action. They are not supposed to be strategic tools for avoiding oversight, but that is exactly how they are being used. I want you to notice the pattern here. Every time scrutiny tightens, every time Congress starts asking uncomfortable questions, the temperature rises. A new emergency is declared. A new threat is emphasized. The conversation shifts from accountability to crisis management. This is not accidental. It is a strategy. When everything is an emergency, nothing gets examined carefully. When every week brings a new crisis, last week's questions get forgotten. When the president is always fighting some urgent battle, oversight looks like obstruction. Flood the zone, change the subject, raise the stakes, hope attention drifts elsewhere. We have watched this playbook operate for years. The Venezuelan oil emergency isn't really about oil. It's about control. It's about narrative. It's about keeping the machinery of government so busy responding to crises that it never gets around to the slow, unglamorous work of accountability. And that work is exactly what the administration cannot afford right now. This is a critical point, and I'd like to hear your take. Do you believe the definition of a national emergency has been stretched too far in recent years? Or do you think these measures are necessary? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This brings us to a quiet threat that most people are missing in all of this: the power of oversight and the paper trail. While the headlines focus on war powers and emergency declarations, a quieter pressure is building underneath. and it may ultimately matter more than any of the dramatic confrontations. I'm talking about oversight, documentation, timelines, the boring procedural machinery of government accountability. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and others have been asking pointed questions. Not accusations, questions. Why have promised document releases been delayed? Why have review timelines stretched indefinitely? Why have statutory deadlines slipped without explanation? These aren't partisan attacks. They are process inquiries. And process inquiries are what administrations fear most. Here is why. When a senator makes a speech criticizing the president, it is political theater. Everyone expects it. It changes nothing. The base rallies, the opposition jeers, and the wheel turns. But when a senator starts asking about Inspector General compliance, about missed deadlines, about chains of documentation, that is different. That is the beginning of a paper trail. And paper trails do not care about political loyalty. Records are stubborn. They don't disappear with a tweet. They don't dissolve at a rally. They sit in filing cabinets and on secure servers, waiting to be subpoenaed. The administration itself framed certain disclosures as priorities, urgent, transparent, coming soon. The rhetoric was clear, but the reality has moved far more slowly than the promises suggested. When that gap between rhetoric and execution becomes visible, credibility suffers. And once credibility is questioned, every future explanation faces deeper skepticism. That is the trap the administration is trying to avoid. A request for an Inspector General review isn't an accusation. It is an acknowledgement that something in the process isn't working, whether through mismanagement, competing priorities, or something else entirely. But for a president who treats every inquiry as an attack, even neutral oversight feels like warfare. And that is the problem, because oversight isn't optional. It is how democratic governments function. It is how power stays accountable. It is how citizens know whether their leaders are actually doing what they claim. When a president treats oversight as an enemy rather than a feature, the entire system starts to wobble. We must also confront a less visible but perhaps more corrosive aspect of this struggle, the systematic dismantling of institutional expertise. For decades, regardless of which party held the White House, there was a shared understanding that the presidency relies on a bedrock of career professionals, intelligence analysts, military strategists, diplomats, and economists who serve the country, not the individual. These are the people who provide the data, the historical context, and the worst-case scenarios that a president needs to hear, even if he does not want to hear them. They are the guardians of reality in a town often consumed by fantasy. But what we are witnessing now is a deliberate severance of that lifeline. When Republican senators sit in those classified briefings I mentioned earlier, they are noticing something disturbing. It is not just that the president ignores advice. It is that the channels for delivering that advice are being dismantled. We are seeing an exodus of experience from the State Department, the Pentagon, and the intelligence community. These aren't partisan operatives. These are men and women who have navigated the Cold War, the post-9/11 landscape, and financial crises. They are the institutional memory of the United States. When a senior diplomat with 30 years of experience in the Middle East is pushed out because they refuse to tailor their analysis to fit a political narrative, that knowledge walks out the door with them, perhaps never to return. Why does this matter to the Republican revolt? Because traditional conservatism has always placed a premium on order, competence, and prudent management. There is a deep-seated belief among the older guard in the Senate that you cannot run a superpower on intuition alone. When you strip away the experts, you remove the shock absorbers that prevent a bad idea from becoming a catastrophic policy. We are seeing policy made by tweet, strategy shifted by cable news segments, and complex military decisions announced without consulting the generals who have to execute them. This unpredictability is the enemy of stability, and stability is what these senators have spent their careers trying to maintain. This creates a vacuum of competence that creates a very specific kind of fear on Capitol Hill. They know that when a crisis hits, a real unmanufactured crisis, perhaps a pandemic, a financial collapse, or a kinetic war, the country needs a fully staffed, fully functioning executive branch. Instead, they see acting directors, vacant offices, and a culture where telling the truth to leadership is a career-ending offense. This isn't just draining the swamp, it is draining the reservoir of wisdom that keeps the nation safe. It is a form of unilateral disarmament in a dangerous world. Senator after senator has privately expressed that this hollowing out of the government is unsustainable. They understand that while presidents come and go, the machinery of governance must remain intact. If you break the machine, it doesn't matter who wins the next election. The capacity to govern is compromised. This realization is a key driver of the quiet legislative pushback we are seeing. It is an attempt to force the administration to respect the process, to engage with the intelligence, and to recognize that the presidency is a stewardship, not a solo act. The fight for oversight isn't just about checking boxes. It is about ensuring that there are still qualified people in the room when the life and death decisions are made. It is about preserving the competence that ensures our children and grandchildren inherit a functioning government, not a hollow shell. I know many of you watching have decades of professional experience in your own fields. You know that experience matters. Does this loss of institutional knowledge worry you as much as it worries these senators? I'd be very interested to read your experiences in the comments. You might be asking why this is happening right now, which leads us to the precedent paradox. Let me tell you what Republican senators are actually worried about. It isn't just Trump, it isn't just this presidency, it is what comes after. Here's the thing about constitutional norms, the unwritten rules that keep our republic functioning. Once they break, they don't automatically reassemble. Precedents set by one president become tools available to the next. Shortcuts taken today become standard practice tomorrow. If a Republican president can declare emergencies to bypass Congress whenever convenient, a future Democratic president will do the same. If a president can threaten military action against allies without consequence, future presidents will feel empowered to go further. If a president can treat oversight as sabotage and intimidate lawmakers who disagree, future presidents will inherit that playbook. Republicans understand this. The ones who have been in Washington long enough, the institutionalists, have seen how power accumulates. They know that the pendulum of American politics always swings back. They know that defending a president today might mean enabling a different president tomorrow, one they do not agree with, one they cannot control. That is why some of them are finally drawing lines, not because they have had a sudden change of heart about the man in the Oval Office personally, but because they are thinking about the institution. They are thinking about the Senate's role. They are asking whether Congress will still matter in 10 years if they let these precedents stand. That calculation is what is driving the revolt. It is not ideological. It is structural. It is Republicans asking themselves, if we don't stop this now, will we even have the ability to stop it later? And increasingly, the answer they are arriving at is no. Once a president successfully argues that he is guided only by personal judgment, not by law, not by treaties, not by constitutional limits, the office itself transforms. It stops being a position within a system and starts being the system itself. That transformation is what some Republicans are now trying to prevent, quietly, carefully, with full awareness that they might fail. But trying anyway because the alternative is worse. Loyalty in politics is conditional. It is based on mutual interest, shared goals, and perceived benefit. When a leader stops providing those things, loyalty evaporates. And right now, Republicans are doing the math. They are looking at the war rhetoric. They are looking at the emergency declarations. They are looking at the chaos. And they're asking themselves, what exactly am I getting out of this alliance? If the answer is nothing but risk, the alliance doesn't hold. Now, I want to bring this down from abstractions for a moment and talk about the real-world consequences. Because all of this, the constitutional debates, the power struggles, the procedural fights, has real consequences for real people. When a president threatens military action, military families feel it. They are the ones who get deployed. They are the ones who watch the news with a knot in their stomach. They are the ones who don't come home. War is not a rhetorical device to them. It is a reality. When trade relationships destabilize because of erratic foreign policy, workers feel it. Factory orders get canceled. Supply chains break, jobs disappear, the global economy runs on stability and predictability. When the United States becomes an agent of chaos, the ripple effects are felt in pension funds, in 401ks, in the price of goods at the grocery store. When allies lose trust in American commitments, everyone feels it. The dollar weakens, security agreements fray. The world becomes less predictable. None of this is abstract. The rhetoric about Greenland and Denmark isn't just embarrassing, it is dangerous. It makes European allies question whether they can rely on American protection. It makes adversaries wonder if they can exploit the chaos. It makes neutral countries recalculate which side they want to be on. That erosion of trust doesn't show up in a single headline. It accumulates gradually, deal by deal, relationship by relationship, until one day America wakes up isolated in ways it never expected. And the emergency declarations? They are not just constitutional concerns, they are economic distortions. When presidents use emergency powers to direct resources toward political goals rather than genuine crises, markets get distorted, investments get misallocated, the economy begins to serve politics instead of people. This is what is at stake, not just principles, not just norms, lives, livelihoods, the basic stability that allows people to plan for the future. When government becomes unpredictable, ordinary people pay the price. They are the ones who can't hedge their bets. They are the ones who depend on systems working as advertised. The Republican revolt isn't just about limiting presidential power. It's about protecting the predictability that makes normal life possible. So, as we consider the verdict of history, where does this go from here? I'm not going to make predictions. Anyone who tells you they know exactly how this ends is lying. Politics doesn't work that way. There are too many variables, too many personalities, too much chaos in the system. But I can tell you what to watch for. There are 5 indicators that will tell us which way the wind is blowing. First, watch the War Powers Resolution. If it actually passes with enough support to survive a veto, that is a genuine constitutional moment. It would mean Congress is reasserting authority it has let atrophy for decades. It would be a historical pivot point. Second, watch the oversight requests, the Inspector General inquiries, the document demands, the subpoenas. If those processes continue moving forward despite pressure, it means the institutional machinery is still functioning. If they quietly stall out, that tells a different, darker story. Third, watch the Republican coalition. Right now, the senators pushing back are a minority within their party. If that minority grows, the president's leverage shrinks. If it stays isolated, the revolt fizzles. Fourth, watch the president's language. When he feels cornered, he escalates. More emergency declarations, more extreme rhetoric, more loyalty tests. The more pressure he feels, the more dramatic his responses become. And fifth, and this is the most important one, watch what happens to the people who said no. Watch Senator Susan Collins. Watch the other Republicans who crossed the aisle. Watch the senators who asked uncomfortable questions. Do they face consequences? Do they lose committee positions? Do they get primaried? Or do they survive intact? The answer will tell you whether resistance is viable, whether saying no to this president carries an acceptable cost, whether the incentive structure of Republican politics has actually changed, or whether this was just a temporary blip. That is what will determine whether this revolt matters, or whether it is just another headline that fades away. Finally, I want to step back and ask a bigger question, because this story isn't really about Trump. Not ultimately. It is about something older and more fundamental. It is about whether the rules that govern power are stronger than the individuals who temporarily hold it. Every democracy faces this question eventually. At some point, a leader comes along who believes the rules don't apply to them, who treats every limit as an obstacle, who sees the Constitution as a suggestion rather than a constraint. When that happens, the system faces a choice. It can bend, it can break, or it can hold. Right now, we are watching America's system get tested in real time. The emergency powers, the war rhetoric, the intimidation of lawmakers, the treatment of oversight, as sabotage, all of it is pressure against the boundaries. And the boundaries are responding, not as quickly as some would like, not as firmly as others would hope, but they are responding. Republicans crossing the aisle, inspectors general receiving requests, senators asking uncomfortable questions, votes being taken that weren't supposed to happen. That is not nothing. It doesn't guarantee the system holds. History is full of democracies that bent until they broke, that tolerated small violations until large ones became normal, that woke up one day to find the rules had been rewritten while everyone was distracted. But it isn't inevitable either. Systems hold when people make them hold, when lawmakers decide their oaths matter more than their careers, when institutions prioritize function over convenience, when citizens pay attention and demand accountability. None of that happens automatically. All of it requires choice, and right now some people are making that choice. Imperfectly, incompletely, but making it. That is the story underneath all the noise. Let me leave you with 3 things to remember as you watch the news in the coming weeks. First, this revolt is real. Republicans aren't just criticizing in private anymore. They are taking votes. They are advancing resolutions. They are drawing lines they have never drawn before. That doesn't mean it will succeed, but it is happening, and it matters. Second, emergency powers are being weaponized. The pattern is clear. Whenever scrutiny builds, a new crisis appears. The conversation shifts from accountability to emergency response. This is not coincidence. It is strategy. And recognizing the strategy is the first step to not being manipulated by it. Third, precedents outlive presidents. Whatever happens in this conflict will shape how power works long after Trump is gone. The shortcuts taken today become the norms of tomorrow. That is why the stakes extend far beyond any single personality or any single election. These 3 things, the revolt, the weaponized emergencies, the precedent problem, are all connected. They are different angles on the same question. Can the system constrain a leader who does not believe he should be constrained? We are about to find out. Democracy doesn't defend itself. It depends on people. Lawmakers who take their oath seriously. Institutions that prioritize function over politics. Citizens who pay attention, even when it is exhausting. Everyone playing their part, doing their piece, holding the line. Right now, some of that is happening. Not enough, maybe. Not fast enough, probably, but happening. The resistance is not coming from the outside anymore. It is coming from within, from people who know him, who have worked with him, who have defended him, and who have decided that some lines cannot be crossed. That is significant. It doesn't guarantee a happy ending. History is full of warnings ignored, chances missed, systems that bent until they shattered. But it is a reminder that outcomes aren't predetermined, that choices matter, that individuals in the right moment can change the direction of events. We are in that kind of moment right now. What happens next depends on whether enough people in Congress and institutions and the public decide that the rules still matter more than any individual. That power should be constrained, not personal. That democracy is worth the inconvenience of actually maintaining it. If this analysis helped clarify the situation for you, please like this video to help others find it. And do not forget to subscribe if you want more content that respects your intelligence. I will see you in the comments section. Thank you for your time, and thank you for caring enough about this country to look beneath the surface. I will see you next time.